So, Sevagoth, the Warframe DE hates for some reason. Like, he doesn't have alternate skins, his best ability is Subsume, so you never play him, he's annoying to farm, so you don't get a second one to actually play it, and he doesn't have an augment.
You do know he got an augment recently, right? Does that ruin your video?
Oh yeah, it very much does mess with the video. Like, I have to re-record everything. I was about to start editing, but no, of course I cannot do that, because DE hates me, and me specifically. Okay, so a funny story. This video was finished except the editing. I started editing the day with Prime Access came out while waiting for that access to start. Yeah, guess what? We got the augment that day. So thank you, DE, for that. I had to rewrite this shit, but it's fine. I'm not mad. I'm not mad at throwing like 20 hours into the wind. Honestly, I'm very happy about the augment though, and let's start by talking about Sevagoth's abilities. Reap is Sevagoth's first ability. It sends out his shadow in front of him, the shadow tries to maneuver to enemies, or if you want to manually control it, you can just aim down sights and he will go to your crosshair. It does a small amount of radiation damage, and it debuffs enemies with the debuff called Death's Harvest. Those enemies take quite a lot of more damage. It also is the only power that has an argument, which we will talk about further in the build section of the video. Then you have So. So is a small damage over time effect, but combined with Reap, it does a lot more because enemies affected by So, if they get hit by the shadow Reap sends out, deal a small amount of their max HP to enemies in radius. They also take a second hit of Reap's damage, but as Reap damage isn't that high, it is quite minuscule. But if you have a lot of enemies in one place, it does a lot of damage. Then you have Gloom, doesn't need a lot of introduction, slows enemies in radius, heals you, and for Sevagoth specifically, it also fills your death well. The same goes for Reap and So. Those are the two abilities that fill up your death well meter, so you can go into your Exalted Shadow, which you do with his fourth ability. It literally is just a form switch, it does nothing else. Then you have the passive. When you die, Sevagoth becomes a tombstone and you can run around in his shadow form. In the shadow form, you deal 100% of an enemy's health damage, ignoring armor and shield, so you one-shot everything except enemies with overguard, and if you run into a nullifier bubble, you would instantly die. But if you kill 5 enemies in that form, you revive instantly. Then we have the Shadow. The Shadow has a lot simpler ability. Embrace is a CC that pulls enemies towards you because the Shadow is a melee focused character. It is very good for you. You have Consume, you dash forward, heal yourself by the enemies you hit, and do quite a lot of radiation damage. And Death's Harvest just inflicts the Death's Harvest debuff to enemies in range. And Reunite puts you together with your main form again. If the Shadow dies, you just become your main form again. You don't have to go into bleed out. So, let's start with the DPS build. I want to tell you first, I have 2 Crimson Archon shards for ability strength, 1 Amber Archon shard for casting speed, and 2 energy max. I would highly recommend, if you really want to play Sevagoth a lot, to put these ability strength on him, as it frees up your Excellus slot. This is not necessary though, you just are locked into a power drift in the Excellus slot. So, this is the build. You are running Brief Despite as the Aura mod. I think Brief Despite is really good as you don't have a lot of health and armor, so you can shield gate a lot with it, but it's quite variable. If you don't like shield gating, Sevagoth probably will be a lot squishier for you than for me, but you can run basically any aura you like. Then we have Cunning Drift. Cunning Drift just gives us ability range. This has to be Power Drift for the max slow if you are not on the 2 Archon shots I am on. If you have them though, you don't need this, you can play Prime Sure-Footed or you can play Power Drift. Then we have Rolling Guard as like our main tool of survivability. You could also play Adaptation or just Vitality for this. I prefer Rolling Guard as status effects very much can kill you very easily. And you can Rolling Guard into Shadow to refill your entire shields basically and shield gate forever if you are out of energy. Fleeting Expertise and Transient Fortitude are very good on him, as he needs efficiency and strength quite a lot, and he does not care that much about duration, even though if it gets too low, Gloom will start ravaging your energy, so I wouldn't recommend going way too low. That's the reason why on continuity we are using this to counterbalance the duration loss out of these two. If you are subzooming over Gloom, which I think is the best subzoom on the DPS build, if you want to subzoom over something, even though I would not recommend it, you do not need the continuity unless the thing you subzoomed onto needs the duration. Otherwise, keep it on, as Gloom kills your entire FP bar in a second otherwise. Primed Flow. Yeah, we caster frame, we need a lot of energy. Primed Flow helps also with that. Umbral Intensify, we need to hit 275% power strength to fully slow enemies with Gloom, so Umbral Intensify is one of the best strengths within the game. Shadow Haze is the augment, and Stretch. The augment probably requires a bit more explanation, so I'm going to do that. It basically increases your crit chance on enemies affected by Death's Harvest by 50%. That 50% is flat, meaning it just gets added at the end of all other calculations, and it scales off power strength. So on this build with 224% power strength, you have a 112 critical chance. So every weapon at least with every hit crits guaranteed and have a chance to do even more without even considering its own crit chance. And if an enemy afflicted by Death Harvest dies, you spawn another shadow. The limit of that is 3 shadows at a time. Those sadly don't scale with power strength, so you don't get more shadows out of it. Those shadows copy your shadow you send out with your 1 in normal form. Sadly, the shadows you summon with the augment do spread Death's Harvest again, but if those enemies affected by Death Harvest die, they don't spawn another shadow, even if you theoretically could spawn another one. This might be a bug though, so if they summon one for you, DS fix it, and that would be great. Then for the augments we have Mod Augmented. I think Mod Augmented is really good in like endurance missions, survival, disruptions, defense if you want to go that far, interceptions, everything you would farm for a long time. This is where Mod Augmented is king, because you need the power strength to reach a full slow and gloom, and it in general just buffs your kit. If you are running a shorter mission, you could run Mold Vigor, as with Xenuric's Hardened Wellspring, it does give you the full strength on Gloom, and as Gloom snapshots on activation, you have the full strength for the entire time as long as you can keep Gloom up. I just think for endurance mission, this is just straight up worse. For the second argument, I'm running Blessing as I don't have a lot of health, but you can run anything. I would personally recommend Arcane Energize if you have at max, as Sevagoth still has energy problems to a degree, and Energize very much helps with that, but you can run basically anything you want. And for the Gloom support build now, we have Steel Charge in the Aura mod. This is because I like using melee weapons, especially with this build, as you always have Gloom around you. This can be whatever you want though. Then we have Cunning Drift. I have Cunning Drift here. If you have the Archon shards, you could also run Primed Sure-Footed in here. Or if you don't have the Archon shards, you have to run Power Drift in here. There is no other option, as you want the full slow on Gloom at all times. Then Narrow-Minded and Fleeting Expertise. Both basically decrease the drain of Gloom, which, as you always want to have Gloom up, it's great. Transient Fortitude and Umbral Intensify give you the strength, so your Gloom actually slows a lot. Prime Continuity also increases your duration, which decreases the drain on Gloom. And Stretch and Augur Reach are here to counterbalance the range loss you get from Narrow-Minded. For the Arcanes, again, Mold Augment or Mold Vigor, depending on the mission. And this is again fine. I would highly recommend Blessing on this build though, as Blessing gives you more health to health tank with Gloom. Now, for the subzooms, on the DPS build, I wouldn't suggest subzooming at all if you have to subzoom over Gloom, as the Shadow is a really good DPS tool, and these two work wonderful together. And you need your one to trigger the augment, which is really, really good. If you have to do it over Gloom, and if you're subzooming over Gloom and you subzoom like an armor strip that is not tied to duration, you can take out the Prime Continuity and can put in whatever you want. This is not necessary if you take it out. If you don't want to subzoom over Gloom, probably should keep it in to keep the energy cost of Gloom down. On the Gloom support build, you don't want to go into your shadow, so you can freely subzoom over it. On there, you can subzoom your general weapon damage buffs, Xardas Whisper, Roar, Eclipse, the standard ones. If you want to be a bit more spicy, you can play the Citrine subzoom. I think Crystal Fractures is his name. the one where you throw the crystals, as it gives you energy and health orbs, which can feed into Arcane Blessing or Arcane Energize if you're playing them. They also just give energy and in general good support to your team. You can also run Breach Surge to spread out your damage a bit further. Even though it has been nerfed, it is still a good ability. You can run Nourish, which I am doing, as it increases the energy gain. It also gives you Viral, which is the best status effect in the game in my opinion, alongside Slash. You could also run any armor strip. You are on such high strength, everything but Pillage full strips, and if you're on Corrosive Projection, Pillage also full strips. You are fine. Okay, so a small interjection. What I just said about Pillage and Corrosive Projection is bullshit. You actually cannot do that. I used to run a build that could do it, but I can't anymore. If you run 2 Corrosive Projection, you can still full armor strip, or you can just cast it 2 times and still full armor strip. Or Dispensary. It just is free energy and ammunition. It is really good, but I don't think it's as good as other options, but it is a option. Then for the Shadow build, this is a budget build. It's 0 former. I'm of the opinion you don't need anything really on the Shadow. All you need is a bit of survivability and preparations. Preparation makes it so every time you enter Shadow, the Shadow has full energy, so you can spam your abilities to high hand, even if you don't have efficiency. Because you don't need it, preparation just gives you infinitely. I would suggest Arcane Energize if you have it, as it gives the small burst of energy to teammates, so the allies at 50 meters. Also applies to the main body if you switch to it fast enough. And the second Arcane, you could literally just play nothing. You could play Reaper if you have it maxed, you could play Mauled Augment, you can play Blessing, you can play basically everything in here. But you are locked into melee weapons, so I suggest Arcane that somehow helps that. If you want to invest more into it, you can play Prime Sure-Footed in the Excellent slot. I don't want to do that, as I don't think the Shadow actually needs it. And then the claws are like the most basic melee build. We don't have Vicious Frost leveled up. This is first of all to spare on Former. I know I'm cheap, but the second one is also to keep our viral slash ratio a bit more to slash. Like, we are doing a lot of damage with this. We are already doing insane damage with it. We don't really need the maxed out Vicious Frost. And the more slash we proc, the better. And our blocking standstill combo has a guaranteed slash proc, so you don't necessarily need to do this. But as that sometimes is not the most optimal combo, as the just neutral attack is a wider attack, so if you have more enemies in front of you, it sometimes can be better to do that. I still want a higher chance to proc slash. Then, for the focus school, it's Yunara Xenoric. You're a frame that struggles with energy and armor. It is very easy. Those are like the 2 best options in the game. As for weapons, there's not generally anything you have to think about. AoE is really good on him, but not necessary. I would just suggest use a weapon that can benefit a lot from the crits. Like, I don't think the Fenmore is a good fit for him, as crit is something the Fenmore doesn't really like that much, and your 1 with the augment gives you quite a lot of crit. If you're on the Gloom support build, feel free though, it doesn't matter. So, thanks for watching the Sevagoth guide, I very much appreciate it. The next video is probably gonna be about a few things I would change about Warframe. And that's gonna take another 5 months, so bye!